Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's stories all involve exes, whether they're ex-best friends, ex-lovers, or even exes of a family member. Either way, they're creepy, and some are scary. Please hit that like button if you enjoy the video, and sit back and relax. When I was 23, I was running my first place when my ex-girlfriend reached out to me. We had dated for a few months in high school. It just went bad because I was a douche and started talking to another girl. It had been 10 years since high school. Anyway, my ex said she was over what happened when we were teenagers and was willing to give it another shot. So we have a date, and then several dates, and things were going very well. So about a month into our relationship, I'm at work on the late shift, and she calls me saying she had gotten into an argument with her mom that had turned into domestic violence, saying something about how she got slapped and needed to cool off at my place. I get home, and turns out she was moving in. I'm pretty laid back and wanted help with the rent anyways, so I'm somewhat okay with it. I mean, I knew I was walking into a snake pit, but I didn't know it was going to be a viper pit. So we lived together for a whopping 2 months when things take a turn. She starts telling me that she's insecure about me talking to girls, then changes to watching porn as well. We start fighting a lot, sometimes even all night long. She then starts cutting herself, saying it was my fault, and ends up getting tetanus. Late night phone calls asking where I am at work and who I'm with. I work late night hours at an ambulance service. Things come to a head one night when my crazy ex tries to tell me that looking at porn is the same thing as beating her. She starts screaming at me for bringing up the cutting and the doctor's visits, claiming it's all my fault. I get fed up and tell her to move out. This pushes her off the deep end. She grabs my handgun that I keep for self-defense, tells me that she's going to kill me, then herself. I call the police and she leaves shortly afterwards, throwing my loaded handgun outside. I think, yay, it's over, but it wasn't yet. So a few days go by without incident, then my crazy ex texts me something, saying that she needed to give me her house key. I tell her no, to throw it away, but she drives by my house anyway, leaving the key and tapes a note on my door, saying I'm mentally ill and that I need help, and she forgives me, blah blah blah. I stopped reading after the I need help part. She keeps texting me, asking if I read it, even going as far as blaming her behavior on a pregnancy, saying that the baby was mine, but she lost it due to stress. So here I am years down the road, married with a wonderful 2-year-old, with no regrets of leaving that crazy ex. Let's not meet ever again. I have never really posted here before, but let me state that this happened to me years ago. My mom and I are both far away from this creepazoid, and will never ever see him again. It happened back in 2011, maybe 2012. My mom had recently broken up with this guy who I thought was someone that could be a better father than my actual one was, but he broke it off from my mom and moved away. At the time, it was heartbreaking. But my grandmother had the genius idea of hooking my mom up with this guy when the relationship with the last one ended. The man named Bobby was, well, a redneck. And don't get me wrong, rednecks, hillbillies, and the like can actually be really kind and hardworking people. Bobby was not. Bobby was cruel, stupid, lazy, an alcoholic, and an all-around creep. I could not trust him no matter how many times my mom tried to get me to see the good in this asshole. He was racist towards a man who was just trying to make a living as a delivery driver. The poor guy is of Middle Eastern descent, and Bobby berated and yelled at this guy, shouting, "Go back to your own country." And how did this upstanding man defend his racist behavior? By stating that his cousin was killed whilst in the military, and that's why he acted like a prick. In the words of one of my close friends, your cousin died protecting the Middle Eastern man's rights as a US citizen as well. Another thing that Bobby had done was during my 19th birthday party, he overheard me talking to my friends about my sexuality. I'm pan for the record. and after, he demanded I kiss one of my friends to prove it. He went on and on about how sinful I am, and that the Bible says this, that, and the other thing. On top of that, earlier, one of my friends who was 15 at the time had dealt with Bobby leering at her while dancing as if she were a stripper at a strip club. It took my mom a while to be rid of him, and it took them fighting and him calling her a whore because she was a teen mom. My mom was 14 when she had me, to finally kick this creep out of the house. This guy made me angry and afraid, and even caused a rift between my mom and I. We have repaired our relationship somewhat, but Bobby did his damage. The last time I heard from him is when an ex of my uncle had a run-in with Bobby, and he asked about his daughter's location. Confused, my uncle's ex inquired who he was talking about, and he replied with my name. She flat out said, "She's not your daughter." To Bobby, if there's an off chance that you're reading this, you are computer illiterate anyway. I doubt you would. I'm not your daughter. You are a racist, disgusting pig who took advantage of my mother's loneliness, and let's not meet ever again. Since this happened several years ago, I might get some parts mixed up, or some events I may have forgotten, so I'll try to retell my experience the best I can. Bit of a backstory. When I was a little kid, my mom and I would visit my grandparents and all go to church together. I had a friend at church who I was super excited to visit every time I went. We would talk a lot about Pokemon and stuff we liked in general. Around this time, I started puberty and he seemed to be attracted to me. He would hug me and ruffle my hair. He was a big guy and always wore the same yellow shirt. It seemed innocent for a while, and we sort of had a relationship for a few months. Everything was good up until we were dating. I was probably around 16, and he was several years older than me. He one day confided in me that he could see angels, and that he was given a sword from Jesus to fight the demons. Yes, he really said that. As stupid as I was, I believed him. I don't know why, but I did. The times where I wasn't visiting, we would talk over stream, where we played TF2. He would tell me all these stories of fighting demons, and would talk to me through his angel, and it got so much weirder. He would tell me how I would be his princess in heaven, and that we would rule together. That's around the time I started getting uncomfortable and weirded out whenever he would go to hug me and try to go further with me. At one point, I tried to cut ties with him and break up. He would not have it one bit. He would constantly send me messages on email begging me to come back and how I was making a bad choice by leaving him. The last time I ever came in contact with him was also the last time I went to that church. My mom, little brother, and I all had to go to church for a small get-together for my grandma's birthday party. Knowing that my ex's family caters church events, I knew in my gut that he was probably going to be there. My mom told me not to worry about it when I knew something was going to happen. When we arrived, I told my mom that I was going to go to the room where the little kids played and where I knew it would be safe while we waited for the cake. I had brought my DS to distract myself and sat down to play. All of a sudden, I felt like someone was looming over me, a big presence. I knew it was him. I instantly went into flight mode and ran and hid around the church until he stopped following and looking for me. My mom and my brother instantly took me back to the house after I came out of hiding, and I never went back to that church. When we visit my grandparents now, I stay back at the house while everyone else goes to church. My mom occasionally goes to church with them and sometimes encounters him. He sometimes tells her weird cryptic shit. Sometimes I just want to go back and just tell him to never talk to my family ever again. When we first met, you told me that you did not have any like-minded person with you as a friend. We were all in a new place, and I was away from my parents for the first time, and yet I was consoling you, a much older woman who had been away from her parents for 3 or so years. You started hanging out with me when your so-called friends ditched you. We quickly became best friends. Then you started showing me your true colors. You started screaming, shouting, and insulting me to the core if I disagreed with something that you said. You always wanted me to talk about you and sing your praises all the time. If I was sick, you never turned to look at me, and yet you were a good friend? And me being the only person who helped you with each and everything when you broke your leg was a bad friend? While taking you to the doctors when you were sick, you hurt me with the words, repeatedly pricking me and tearing me apart. You were the only person to know about my panic attacks, and the only person to call me attention seeker because of it. You thought I was flirting with a guy who you thought had a crush on you, and you called me a whore for it when he was just helping me during a tough spot, something that you refused to do all the time. You told me to stay away from your friends. You insulted my mom on her parenting. Every assignment of yours, no matter how tired I was, I had to do them. Everyone saw it. Everyone called me your slave, but all you cared about was you. You took it out on me when your crush started dating someone else, and I took it. When you got a boyfriend allegedly, I was the last one to know, and you didn't even show me his picture. And when I got a boyfriend, you went around and told others how I am too young to be committed. You even told me not to talk to you about my relationship. You isolated me from literally everyone, badmouthed me, calling me a flirt, all while laughing and joking with me. You literally put me in all sorts of uncomfortable situations, including making me beg for you to talk to me when you gave me the cold shoulder for something you had done in front of people that I hate. You enjoyed this. And at last, when I cut you out of my life, you were surprised how it was you who was alone. You claimed how I don't have friends, but darling, you're the one that went home without anyone bidding you a goodbye. It's been a year already, and I still have friends whom I ignored once upon a time, for you. To the people who asked me why I was with you, and also if you happen to read this, I know you won't, but if you do, and you wonder why I was with you for a year, it was because I thought of you as a sister, and I generally loved you regardless of what you did. I trusted your words, ignoring your actions, and as silly as it sounds, somewhere in my heart I still love you, but I can't forget how you turned me into a completely different person. Lack of trust, paranoid of people, lack of self-love, and self-confidence. I'm only a shadow of what I used to be. To the ex-best friend who manipulated me, brought out the worst in me, and gave me issues that I have to deal with for the rest of my life. I love you, but please let's not meet again. This story I'm about to tell you happened over a course of roughly 5 or 6 years. Names have, of course, been changed. When I was in college, I met this dude named Steve. He was good looking, well spoken, and confident. He was instantly well liked by most of the people that he met, but was a bit intimidating to me at first, due to the fact that he was pretty jacked and didn't speak to me a whole lot in the beginning. Here I was, an 18 going on 19 fat kid with an inferiority complex that made me act out to get attention. I would wear women's clothes to class to get a laugh, or interrupt the professor with a witticism here and a joke there, again for a laugh. I was that kid, the one that people didn't exactly dislike, but weren't too eager to hang out with, because I could be a bit much at times. This did nothing to help me with my feelings of inadequacy, but I didn't make the connection there until a couple years later. Steve and I didn't exactly become fast and hard friends, because I got pretty drunk at a party once, and he decided instantly that I was annoying. Still, we were civil to each other as we were in the same department and had a couple classes together. We kinda hung out with different crowds too, even inside the department. Steve had recently been kicked out of boot camp in the military. He told everyone that it was because he injured himself badly enough that he had been discharged, but that wasn't true. However, we'll get to that part later. Cut to about 3 or 4 months after my first meeting with Steve, and I had been invited by a mutual friend, Corey, to a small get-together at his place, where he incidentally was roommates with Steve. I told Corey that I was kind of weary of Steve and felt like he didn't like me, to which he replied that I was right and that's why he wanted me to come over. He wanted me and Steve to get to know each other better because he was positive that we would become friends if we just gave each other a chance. After some more prodding, I finally agreed. When I arrived at Corey's house, there were maybe 3 other people from our department there. It seemed like a pretty chill setting. There was some alcohol being passed around, and I drank a little bit, but I kept my distance from Steve. After a couple hours and quite a few beers, I started to feel pretty good. Someone brought out a couple of joints, and those started getting passed around the room. When one of them made its way to me, Steve spoke up. "Don't bother passing it to him. He's a goody-good." I'm not exactly sure why he said that, or even thought that. It might have been because I mentioned in passing that I never smoked weed before. Regardless of why he said it, it made me mad that he was making fun of me. So I did what any 19-year-old drunk dude would do. I grabbed the joint and took the biggest hit I could possibly take. This, as anyone who has smoked weed knows, is a huge mistake for a marijuana virgin when quality kush is handed to them. After my coughing fit and all the laughter at my expense has subsided, I looked at Steve challengingly and he kind of nodded in my direction before resuming his conversation. Now, no one told me that you shouldn't mix alcohol and weed. Had I stopped there, I would have been fine. However, I continued to drink, which exacerbated all the stuff that comes along with being high. By the time I knew I was high, I started getting paranoid. Dry mouth felt like my tongue was swelling up, and my throat started to close. The feeling of almost weightlessness that sometimes accompanies being high made me feel like I wasn't anchored to the floor anymore. The time dilation that you would experience from weed made me feel like I was literally frozen in time. I started to panic. By this point, everyone else had gone home, and it was just me, Steve, and Corey. I explained to Corey that I thought I was allergic to the weed because I wasn't feeling right. And oddly enough, Steve asked me to explain what I was feeling. When I did, he walked me through all of it and calmed me down. Once I was calm, he put a controller in my hands and we played video games until I sobered up enough to drive. It was honestly really cool of him, and it was the start of one of the best relationships I've ever had, until it became the worst, most abusive relationship. Over the next year or so, Steve and I became really close. I considered him one of my best friends. Being around him was almost like a drug. He just had this way of making you feel like you mattered. I know now that he was a complete psychopath, but you don't really see those signs until it's too late. He harassed me until I started working out with him, which meant I had the energy and confidence in myself. I got into pretty decent shape. I wasn't ripped. I wasn't even what most people would call fit, but I wasn't the fat kid anymore either. He would come to my house and force me to go out and do stuff. Before I had become friends with him, I was kind of a loner and a hermit. We would go to the lake and just dick around, or go hiking in the woods, or any number of outdoorsy type of activities. For the first time in years, I had confidence in myself, and I was actually quite happy. Enter Lisa. Lisa was the love of my life, the one that got away, or rather the one that I stupidly dumped twice over a 5-year relationship because I was scared. She's not a huge part of this ballad to Steve, but she played a role. She had came to my hometown to go to school, and she had a boyfriend back home, but we clicked immediately. I know if you're wondering, and no, we didn't hook up or anything when she was with him. She made her intentions towards me clear, and I made it clear that nothing would happen while she was dating someone else. She told me that she had been considering breaking things off with him as he was a bit controlling and dickish. And the next day she walked up to me and kissed me full on the mouth, and when I started pushing her away, she laughed and said, "I broke up with Jason last night. You're mine now." I smiled back and our relationship began. I apologize for getting into details that have nothing to do with Steve. It was just an immensely happy time of my life, and I would have never had the confidence to flirt with Lisa in the first place if it weren't for Steve. The next year after Lisa and I got together was rather uneventful. I will admit that there were some red flags with Steve that either I didn't see or just outright ignored. Looking back on it now, one of the most obvious was the one day I was hanging out with Lisa when Steve showed up. She had always gotten a bad vibe from him, rightly so, and so when he showed up, she left to go to class 45 minutes early. Watching her walk away, Steve said, "I could take her away from you if I wanted." I gave him an incredulous look, slightly panicking that the man who called himself my friend might actually want to and be able to sway Lisa to date him instead. He laughed at my expression and added, "Don't worry, I don't want her. She's a 6 at best. She's perfect for you, but I like my bitches a little thinner and much hotter. Just thought you should know that if I wanted, I could take her away from you." It should be noted that Lisa was thin, if curvaceous, and absolutely gorgeous in a very classical way. I am now convinced that Steve was actually attracted to her, but he saw himself as the alpha and needed to assert his dominance over me, one of his perceived betas. I'm ashamed to admit that it worked. I did get angry and told him not to talk to or about my girlfriend in such a gross manner. But once he gave me a half-hearted apology, I kind of shrugged it off. The next year, there were even more red flags that I chose to ignore. I know this story is moving rather quickly now, but those first couple of years weren't really that bad. Yes, Steve started showing his true colors, but the really horrible shit was still to come. Also, if you're keeping track, I was at a 2-year college for 3 years. That's just how long it took me to get my associate's degree. That's neither here nor there. Steve started dating one of the freshmen in our department. I heard from others that the relationship was incredibly psychologically abusive on his end, but I kept brushing it off because the girl he was dating hadn't spoken up and Steve was a good guy, right? I mean, I hadn't witnessed it. Other people must just be misinterpreting Steve's unusual sense of humor in a way that painted him in a bad light in their minds. I was unaware at the time that, of course, she wouldn't speak out against him, because that's what psychological abuse is. It's gaslighting and insults and ensuring that the victim believes themselves to be absolutely worthless and deserving of treatment that they receive. During the end of year department party, I proposed to Lisa, and she said yes. When Lisa and I graduated from college with an associate's degree, we decided to move to a new school together. Despite the fact that our relationship grew stronger than ever without Steve in our lives, a dot that I did not connect due to still being firmly in his psychotic grasp. The college we decided to transfer to was absolute garbage, and after the year was over, we decided to transfer again to a better and cheaper school, this time about an hour away. Coincidentally, it was the same school that Steve was now attending. That summer, Lisa moved back to her hometown while transitioning between schools, and I ended things with her for the first time, over the phone. Shitty, I know. But we were like 5 hours apart since I stayed behind to live on campus and work, and neither of us could find the time to visit each other. The only reason I can logically come up with is that I was scared of the commitment. I always said that when I marry, I want to be in it for life. I got in my own head and started worrying about whether or not Lisa was the person I really wanted to spend the rest of my life with. When I moved to the new city, Steve helped me get an apartment in the same complex where he and Corey, the friend from earlier, both lived. We were in separate buildings, but the apartments were set up in a way that the courtyard between the two buildings was only like 40 feet across. I could actually see into Steve's basement apartment window from the second floor when both of our blinds were open. There were many times that I would glance out the window while playing video games or something, and Steve would catch my eye and wave me over. So I would obediently turn off my game and head over to his place to smoke a little weed and watch one of his 4 DVDs for the billionth time. During this time of my life, I became a major alcoholic. I'm fairly certain that Steve realized this was happening, but said nothing because he wanted to be able to hold it over me later. He may have contributed to my alcoholism a little bit. He began to use the same bully tactics he had once employed to get me to work out and go do things. This time, he was using them to get me to go out drinking. If I told him that I had class early the next day or homework that needed to be done, he would just wave it off and tell me that we would be back in plenty of time for me to get my homework done or plenty of time to sleep. We would often stay out until 2 in the morning when the bars closed, or later if we met someone cool and decided that we were going to hang out at their house for a little bit afterwards. If I said I didn't have the money, he would promise to pay for me. At the end of the night, I would get a bill I could barely afford, and then he would explain that he clearly meant that he would pay for the first couple of rounds, and if I drank more than that, it was my fault. Several times I had to borrow money from him to pay the rent, which further put me in his control. I would like to take a brief break and address the elephant in the room. I realized that every single one of my previous mentioned problems stemmed from me. I could have moderated my drinking. I could have told him no when he asked me to go out. I could have realized sooner that he was never truly going to pay for my bar tab, or that we weren't going to be home early. I take responsibility for all these things. That being said, something you have to understand about Steve is that he would gaslight and make me feel like I was being a bad friend if I ever told him no, despite having a very valid reason for the refusal. What I'm trying to do by telling you this part is to point out that he was never the good friend I thought he was, or he would have pointed out that I was drinking too much. Would it have stopped me? As I know from my numerous attempts by another, really true friend, no, I wouldn't have. But at least in hindsight, I would be able to say, you know, Steve tried to get me to stop drinking. He was a good friend. Anyways, back to the story. Some few months after moving to the new city, Steve introduced me to a friend of his from out of town, Jennifer. She was a very pretty woman with dyed red hair, styled into a pixie cut. She was thin, athletic build, and a gorgeous face. She was honestly every straight man's dream. Not only that, but she was intelligent, funny, quick-witted, compassionate, and kind. I honestly developed a crush on her, but I was sure that she was out of my league. I asked Steve if she was seeing anyone though, because at this point, I still had some confidence. He told me that she wasn't, and asked if I liked her. I said yes, and he assured me that he would try to get a feel of what she thought about me. Cut to a few days later, and Steve is now dating her. This confused the shit out of me, because when he introduced us, they kept making jokes about how neither of them was really interested in the other, and that they would never work as a couple. I think even back then, I knew he had done his psychological fuckery to get her to date him so he could, once again, assert his dominance over me. I shrugged it off, happy that my friend finally found a girl to make him forget that freshman he had been dating a couple years ago. He had constantly moaned about missing her when she finally got the courage to tell him to fuck off one night after he called her fat. She was maybe 95 pounds. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice that Jen was looking more and more exhausted and haggard. When I asked her if she was okay, she would just smile and assure me that her workout was just getting to her. We had started to become friends, so I asked her not to hesitate in coming to me if there was anything I could do to help her out. She thanked me for my kind gesture, but again, she said she would be fine. I would later find out that Steve was treating her the same way that he had treated his previous girlfriend. She apparently told Steve about my offer to help, thinking it was sweet that I wanted to help her. And as you might guess, Steve flew off the fucking handle. I had never seen him so angry. He came into my apartment banging on the door, fit to break it down, and screaming at me to get my two-faced ass out in the hallway so he could kill me. I didn't know this at the time, but Steve had just started taking steroids, which explained part of his unfounded rage. After nearly an hour of him pacing my living room, threatening me, and yelling loud enough to wake the whole damn neighborhood, I was finally able to convince him that my intentions were nothing but friendly towards Jen. Bro code dictated that even if the two of them broke it off, I wasn't going to pursue her, since she had dated one of my best friends. Once he finally believed that I wasn't going to stuff his girl like a Thanksgiving turkey, as he put it, It was like a switch was flipped. Suddenly we were best friends again, and his earlier rage seemed to have been forgotten, as if it never happened. He dumped Jen shortly after. My guess is he realized I had no romantic interest in her anymore, and therefore couldn't use his relationship with her to needle me and control me. I only saw her a handful of times after that, but the last time I saw her, she looked so much happier. Yet another sign about Steve I either didn't see or chose to ignore. About a month after the yelling incident, Lisa and I got back together. She was incredibly distrustful and weary of me at this point, and rightly so. I had broken her heart for no other reason than I was an idiot. Over time, she began to trust me more with her emotions again. This was a mistake on her part, and I don't mean to sound cruel. Perhaps I had picked up some things from Steve. I know that I was fairly manipulative. I am more ashamed of that than I can even portray with words. I hate myself to this day for some of the ways I've treated her. During our second stint as a couple, Lisa was still uncomfortable around Steve, and she would often leave if we were hanging out and Steve showed up. He never seemed to catch on that she didn't want to be around him. Things were made far worse when we went to a house party one night, and Steve groped her. Again, I'm incredibly ashamed to admit what I did when she came to me in tears of rage and disgust and told me what happened. I'm ashamed because the first thing out of my mouth was, "Steve wouldn't do that." Maybe you misunderstood what was going on. He smacked my ass and grabbed my chest. Alright, I'll go talk to him. I should have just cut him out right then and there. I should have taken Lisa home. I should have went and knocked Steve the fuck out. I should have done a lot of things, but I've always been a people pleaser, and Steve brought this out of me in the worst way. When I asked Steve about the situation, he told me that he had grabbed her waist to get around her in the kitchen, which was crowded, and that he accidentally brushed against her breast while reaching for the bottle of rum. I fucking believed him. I went back to Lisa and conveyed what he had told me. After a lot more enraged tears and yelling, she left. Why she didn't just dump my stupid, harassment apologist, victim blaming ass right then, I still don't know. When Steve appeared a few minutes later, I explained what happened. He put on a sympathetic face and said with a chuckle, "Man, fuck that bitch. Let's find you a hot, drunk bitch who wants to give you a blowjob." Even back then I knew that that was a huge red flag, and I did not have sex with a drunk woman, but I still ignored the signs. Lisa didn't speak to me for a week, and she was right to do so. She should have never spoken to me again. For the next few months, things with Steve were a bit strained, and we didn't hang out much. Things with Lisa improved again, now that Steve wasn't around as much. We were even talking about moving in together. This would not ever happen, because I was going to break up with her before long. I didn't know why I was going to do it at this time, but I know it was going to happen. When it did happen, there were no tears like last time. There was no pleading that we could make it work. Lisa simply fixed me with an emotionless, almost dead gaze and said, "My sister told me not to trust you again. I should have listened. Get your shit and get out of my apartment." Now, I really wish she would have left it at that, but over the next couple of years, we would go on to have a few stints as friends with benefits, as we both knew what the other wanted in bed, and it was just easier for both of us, I think, being highly sexual beings, to find comfort with each other when we wanted sex. I obviously obliged. There were no feelings in it for her. It was just sex. We never got back together, but we did become sort of facsimile of friends again for a while. Shortly after our breakup, I became immensely depressed. I didn't realize that it was because I was still in love with Lisa. Why would I be? I had broken things off with her. Regardless, I started drinking even more and stopped working out. I started regaining all the weight I had lost my freshman year of college, and Steve noticed, often remarking that I was a fat fuck. I never really minded it because I was used to my weight being the butt of every other joke. Besides, he always said it with a laugh to let me know that he was only joking, the way good friends always insult each other, right? At the same time, I started hanging out with him again. One day he came to me, asking if I wanted to move into a house with him. I politely declined because I liked living alone. and my rent was relatively cheap for where I lived. He called me a pussy and got unreasonably angry, saying that I owed him everything. He proceeded to scream at me for an hour and a half. He didn't speak to me for 3 days, but eventually calmed down. He never apologized for his ridiculous outburst though. When he moved out, another mutual friend took his apartment after having just gone through a breakup of his own, and I started hanging out with this new friend, Mark, quite a bit since he was just across the courtyard and Steve was a couple miles away. During this time, I met a man through Mark who would go on to become one of my 2 best friends that I've ever had and one of the most amazing people I've ever known. Enter Nick. Remember the friend I mentioned earlier who I said regularly tried to get me to stop drinking? That's Nick. He was and is the man who, for some reason, I never want to disappoint. Even today, being mostly sober, a huge part of what keeps me from drinking is the idea that if Nick found out, I'd be more ashamed of myself than if I publicly shit my pants in front of the woman of my dreams. Personally, that to me is a mark of a true friend, mostly because Nick never asked for or expected me to feel this way. In fact, I think he was a little uncomfortable with it, but it's not something that I could just turn off. Nick and I hit it off fairly quickly and started hanging out regularly. It was with Nick and a circle of friends, all of whom I proudly now call my own friends, that a Dungeons and Dragons group was started and lasted for nearly 4 years. Nick plays a bigger, if not huge, part in the story later. Things continued this way for maybe half a year before I finally decided to take Steve up on his offer and move into his house with him. Mostly because money was tight and my bills would go down. His current roommates had moved away for whatever reason, and he had a couple vacancies. I took one room, and a friend of his from when he was in boot camp, Greg, took the other. For a while, things were awesome. Steve had apparently become Catholic. He was off the Jews. It seemed like I had my old friend back from the days when we first had started becoming chummy. Steve, Greg, and I would often go on road trips, or out to bars, or just to some outdoor attractions around the city and walk around. Now remember when I said that Steve had been discharged from the military and claimed that it was due to an injury? Turns out that was not true at all. One night while Steve was at work, Greg and I were hanging out with some beers and the topic came up. "You know he was crazy, yeah?" Greg asked. "What do you mean?" "He got kicked out before he finished boot camp." "Really?" "He told me that he suffered some kind of injury and they had to let him go." After I said this, an incredulous look came over Greg's face and he turned slowly to look at me. He then proceeded to tell me what Steve had told me was an utter lie. He told me that Steve had had a reason to suspect that his then wife was cheating on him and had been overheard by a commanding officer saying that when he was going to finish boot camp, he was going to murder them both and the daughter that he and his wife had. He had been given an in-depth psychological evaluation and been discharged, essentially for being too insane for the military. I later confirmed this with some of Steve's childhood friends. At this point, I was starting to realize who Steve really was, thinking back on some of the interactions I had with him. Unfortunately, I was stupid loyal to someone I perceived to be a good friend. At some point, I had invited Nick to come over and hang out, to play video games and whatnot. And when Steve met Nick, he immediately called him fat. Now, Nick was at the time a large man. He has since made some enormous strides in his fitness journey. Shout out to Nick for your hard work if you're reading this. You look great regardless. I remember the look of utter disbelief on Nick's face, but I defended Steve by saying that that's just how he made friends. If he wasn't calling you names, then it meant that he didn't like you. By the way, can we stop that shit? Treating people like shit as a way to break the ice is fucking terrible. I'm guilty of that in the past, and I hate that I used to do it. Anyway, not relevant. I could tell that Nick was skeptical, but he just kinda went with it. I think he kinda resented me for not defending him, but he never said so. I don't blame him if he did. A few weeks after the conversation with Greg, Steve had a friend of his from out of town stay with us for the weekend. Greg was out of town for work or something. I forget the details. Before this friend of Steve's arrived, he told me that she was fat, but pretty, and if I wanted to bone down with her, I had his blessing. This did not sit well with me, not only because of how he described her, which I learned wasn't true when she arrived, but because he felt the need to give his permission for two of his friends to have sex with each other. I kept my mouth shut though. I forget the woman's name, but she was a very pretty woman. She was curvaceous, but in no way fat. I was confused as why Steve would describe her as such. She and I got along really well from the start. That night, she and Steve slept together. Again, I'm fairly certain he slept with her because he could tell I was taking a liking to her. I wasn't falling over myself to get in a relationship with her, but I did like her quite a bit. Steve had once again asserted his dominance over me. The next day, we all had lunch at a local restaurant, and Steve had essentially left his friend and myself to drive his car back to the house while he wandered off to do God knows what. I was infuriated that he would do that, not necessarily the leave us part, but the fact that his friend had came to town specifically to visit him, and he had just bailed on her for no real reason. She and I spent the day watching movies and playing video games. We talked quite a bit about Steve, as he was our common link, and a lot of things came to light about Steve that I won't mention here, simply because I don't want to be typing this for the next 2 weeks. I texted Steve multiple times throughout the day, asking where he was. He didn't respond to me until about midnight, when I sent a text telling him it was kind of shitty of him to just leave his friend with me when she had came to see him. The text I got back just read, "Mind your fucking business, fatty. I'll be home when I get home." He finally rolled up around 10 the next morning as his friend was getting ready to leave. He was driving a motorcycle that I had never seen before. He barely said goodbye to the woman as she was leaving, and when the door shut, I rounded on him. "Where the fuck were you, dude?" Feeling myself get angrier by the word at what he had done. Not that it's any of your fucking business, but I was helping a friend bury a body. He shot back as he walked into his room. I knew instantly that that was a lie. I had this intuition when it came to Steve. I could almost always tell when he was lying, and this one was just so outlandish that I didn't even need to consider it to know that it was absolute bullshit. "No, you fucking weren't," I said under my breath. "What was that, fatty?" he said, coming back into the room shirtless and getting into my face. I gently pushed him away from me, and he looked utterly dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that I would ever stand up to him like this. "I said, you're lying," I retorted quickly, enunciating. "But if you want to treat your friend like shit when they travel for 4 hours just to hang out with you for a couple days, then be my guest." We stood there glaring at each other for a few seconds before he deflated and looked slightly ashamed, which shocked the hell out of me. "I was with a girl I'd been dating," he said softly. "So you invited your friend to stay with us?" I said, my anger rising again. "Cheated on your girlfriend with her, bailed on us, and then fucking lied to me about it? Fuck you, you're a fucking douchebag." I turned on my heel and stormed into my room. I'm fairly certain Steve threw something at me, but he missed, because I heard a loud thump on the wall, just to the left of the doorway as I walked through. I didn't stop to find out. I didn't see or speak to Steve for a couple of days after that. It wasn't until Gray came home from his trip that I noticed that we weren't spending time together and were acting coldly towards one another, that our friendship started to repair a bit. Most of it was due to Greg yelling at us that he wasn't going to live with a couple of bitches who couldn't get their shit together and act like adults. Despite our relationship repairing slightly, things were never really the same after that. Over the next few months, Steve started selling drugs and always kept a loaded gun in the house. I specifically remember him telling me one day that some guy was going to be coming over to give him some money that he was owed, and if he showed up when Steve was at work, I was supposed to take the money, count it, and put it on his bedroom desk. I didn't know he was dealing at the time, so I assumed that it was just a guy that owed him money. I agreed and went back to playing video games as he left for work. Steve got home from work before the guy showed up, and then there was a knock on the door. Steve came out of his bedroom with the gun in hand and held his finger to his lips. He opened the door to reveal a man standing on the porch with a wad of cash in hand. Steve immediately pointed the gun at his face, cocked the hammer back, and started screaming at him to drop the fucking money on the ground and get the fuck off his porch. As the dude was fleeing in terror, Steve yelled after him that if he ever saw him again, he would kill him. Of course, I was immediately distressed by what I had just witnessed, but I was equally terrified when he turned to me with a huge grin after collecting the money from the porch and closing the door. I just gave him a weak smile and ignored the whole thing. I learned later that he was back on steroids when it happened. During this time, Steve would regularly come home late at night, 3 sheets to the wind, ranting about one ethnic group or another. The one that sticks out in my mind the most was when he stumbled in so drunk that he could barely string together a coherent thought. He was yelling about globalism and how the Chinese were trying to take over the world. He mumbled a string of words that I couldn't make out then, and shouted clear as day, "Ping Ling," followed by another string of unintelligible bullshit, and finally, "Fucking our daughters." As the last word left his lips, he immediately fell on the floor and began to sob. I had no idea what to do. If I tried to help him, I know that he would get violent towards me. In the end, I did nothing. I just went to my room. A few weeks after that particularly lovely incident, Steve and I got into an argument about something I can't remember. He stormed off into his room, and I thought it was over. I knew from experience that given time and distance, he would calm down. He would never apologize, but at least the situation would de-escalate. I was wrong this time. 10 minutes later, he comes crashing back into the living room, gun in hand, and pointed it in my face, yelling that if I wasn't going to respect him, that he might as well just kill me. "You're not going to shoot me," I said far more calmly than I felt. Inside, I was shitting my pants, despite the fact that I did honestly believe he wasn't going to shoot me. I'd been around guns before, but never had one pointed at me. "Yeah? Why do you think that?" "I know you're not going to shoot me, because I'm one of the few real friends you have left." He seemed to consider this for a moment, and finally lowered his gun. His face was still murder incarnate, but at least the gun wasn't pointed at me. "Can you move, man?" I asked. "I'm trying to watch Netflix." He continued to stare at me for a long while, seeming to be internally fighting with himself, before finally stomping back into his room. I didn't see him again for the rest of the night. A few days later, Steve and Greg asked me to sit down when I had come home from my 3rd double in a row at the restaurant where I worked. I asked why, and they said we needed to talk about me living there. I told them that there was no need, I was moving out. They seemed satisfied with this, and I went into my room to get some much needed sleep. A side note, as I was moving out, I accidentally broke the handle off of the storm door, and Steve lost his mind, screaming at me, calling me all kinds of names, including the N-word. I assured him that I would replace it, but he just kept calling me names. Nick was helping me move out at the time, and once we were away from the house, he gave me a look that spoke volumes. "I know," I said. "I know. Part of the reason why I'm moving out." I didn't say anything. He replied, "You didn't have to." This was the point that I finally snapped and realized that Steve was nothing but a toxic piece of shit. It took someone I hadn't known for very long, giving me a single fucking look for a puzzle piece to finally fall into place and make me go, "Fuck this bag of dicks." After I moved out, I only saw Steve once more. I was coming out of class on the university campus, and he drove up on his motorcycle and started trying to make conversation. But I just made some sort of lame excuse about needing to get to work or home or something and walked away. After about a year, I blocked Steve completely on all social media when he commented on a Facebook post calling my mom the C word. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. About a year after that, Nick and I were at the mall. Being on a bit of a time crunch and needing things from different stores, we decided to head in different directions and meet up at the food court. I finished what I needed to do first and was standing in front of the Dairy Queen waiting for Nick to come meet me when I get a phone call from him. "What's up?" "I just saw Steve. He was going into the store that I was coming out of." He didn't need to tell me which Steve. He knew most of the worst of what I've put in the story by this point. although I'm sure some of these anecdotes would surprise even him. My heart seemed to seize, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I hadn't spoken to Steve in over 2 years, and the thought of coming face to face with him now filled me with dread. "Hello? You there?" "Yeah," I said, finally finding my voice. "I'll meet you at the car." "That's why I told you. I'll be out in a bit." I practically sprinted to my car and just kept praying to whatever gods might exist that Nick would be out soon. I went over and over in my mind what I would say or do if Steve showed up. Luckily, I never had to find out what I would have done or said because Nick appeared pretty quick and we left. That was the last time I heard of Steve. The incidents that are portrayed in the story are not everything that happened, of course. In my relationship with Steve, there were more, including more death threats, a physical altercation, more name calling, and insurance fraud that Steve decided to rope me into without my knowledge. Now I know at this point you're wondering to yourself why I didn't just leave Steve in the dust a long time ago. Why didn't I just walk away from that friendship after the first sign of trouble? Well, there are a few reasons. First and foremost, as I said, Steve was a psychopath. Psychopaths are extremely versed in making people trust them, even if they treat them like trash. Not to mention that he gaslit me and made me feel as though a lot of the smaller incidents were my fault. That in turn led me in believing that the bigger problems were my fault. This is how psychological abusers keep control. Secondly, I'm a loyal friend to fault. I will see the best in people I care about, even if they stab me in the back and beat me down. This is a fault of mine that I'm working on. I only saw the terrible in Steve when he treated another friend I was loyal to like shit. Third, a part of me was terrified to walk away. There was a piece of me that was scared, and sometimes still is, since I blocked him, that he would get it into his head to kill me because I rejected him. This again is part of the conditioning that abusers do. Regardless, I am much happier now, and glad that I got the whole ordeal behind me. I would like to end this on a final note. If you are in a relationship of any kind, where you are starting to see red flags, don't ignore them like I did. I explained away a lot of the red flags that Steve was waving proudly, and I regret it to this day. I was lucky and got out of the most toxic friendship I've ever known, with only some psychological trauma and having my confidence shattered. But it could have ended so much fucking worse. If you need help getting out, seek it immediately. Leave everything behind you if you have to. Things can be replaced, you can't. Anyway, thanks for reading this, and Steve, please stay wherever you move to. I don't ever want to see or hear from you again. In 2016, my cousin Anna met a man named Jonathan. They were extremely happy together, to the point that in 2018 they got engaged. Anna, however, cheated on Jonathan shortly after with a man named Link. This was poorly solved by the idea to have a polyamorous relationship with Link. As time went on, Link turned into a horrific housemate and boyfriend, so Anna and Jonathan decided that it was time to remove him. This proved extremely difficult. Anna started by asking him to leave, and it didn't work. He refused to go. The landlord also refused to evict him due to him doing nothing wrong. They decided he needed a reason to leave, and I was tasked with removing him. I'm a complete pacifist, but I'm also 6'4" and scared the fuck out of him. I told him to leave, and after I had a short conversation with the landlord, who he had just called, he was forced to leave via an eviction notice. After he was kicked out, he revealed that he was only there for Anna, who would have fucking guessed, and that he would revive the relationship. This was accomplished in a weird way. He was stalking her constantly, following her home from work, standing at her car when she went into the store, just being all around creepy. This was not only a bond to her though, he followed everyone else in the house. He would even keep tabs on me. I saw him watching me in the school parking lot, and we decided things had to change. One night I visited them and told them about that event. Anna decided enough was enough. She called Link and told him to fuck off and that she would call the cops if she saw him again. We all went to sleep and thought that would be the end of it. Oh boy, we were wrong. It was exactly 7 in the morning. I was woken up to what sounded like thunder over and over again. The entire house was shaking. He was at the front door punching it, trying to get in. Because he was so crazy, I had carried a gun to their house the night before, just in case of this. I yelled, "I'm ready to fucking kill you if you're ready to fucking die." He took this notice seriously. The cops were angry about me threatening him, but due to the circumstances, they let me go. I was there a month later and was having a good time with them, playing video games, beating Jonathan's ass at Mortal Kombat, as I do. And then I saw him looking at me through the window. I freaked the fuck out. It was like a spider crawling up your arm. He bolted the moment I saw him, and I couldn't sleep that night. A few nights ago, I came over again, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I wanted a glass of chocolate milk and an ibuprofen, as my head hurt and I needed to sleep. I went to the kitchen, and he was there. He had a big fucking knife in his right hand. I remember freezing and looking at him. His pupils were dilated, and he really freaked me the fuck out. He said, "It's not what it looks like. I'm just here to stab Jonathan in his face. I love her so much, and everything was fine before she intervened." I ended up attacking him and got the knife away from him before he ran. When the police finally caught him, he informed us that they would hold him for a bit and give him a warning. Because technically, since he was fighting it in court, it was still his house and the eviction had not fully gone through. They told us that we needed a restraining order to keep him away. You might ask, why am I writing this? Well, the only way I could sleep is to write about my experiences. However, he will slip up again and get arrested or something. But as long as he's around, I'm gonna have trouble sleeping, and I'm scared for everyone I care about's life. When I was 13, I had not long broken up with this girl who supposedly had a psycho family. One of this girl's family was a very close friend who was supposedly obsessed with her. I was invited out with my friends after school one day, and this boy latched on. Everyone told me to come out and that he wanted to make amends and that he understood why I did what I did. Being the pushover I am, I went out and hung out in the parks and smoked and drank. As it started to get dark, I decided to go home. I felt uneasy being around him, and he started acting all weird, talking about fights he had been in. He was bragging about bashing some guy's face in with his fist in school. Because of this, I left. I didn't feel safe whatsoever. The next day, my best friend and all the other kids that were out that night came to school and told me it got worse after I left. Apparently, after they had drank some more, he started waving this huge kitchen knife around and telling everyone that he was going to stab me in the stomach for breaking that girl's heart. My dad made us move since he knew where I lived. I continued getting death threats on social media though, until about a year or two later when it was in the paper and was spread all around town. He had broken into someone's house and stabbed a man to death and then slit his wrist in the man's bathtub. They found high amounts of cocaine and cannabis in his system, along with a lot of alcohol. The elderly neighbor phoned the police when they heard some commotion, and when they hadn't seen the man leave for work. They found the attacker barely conscious, and he's now in a psych ward. Again, this was supposedly over a girl. I think I dodged a bullet there. My father had been dating this girl for a while, and things were going great. She met us a few times and got along together with my sister and I. Eventually, my father asked her to move in with us. She drove 7 hours to move in and brought her 2 cats. Things were great for the first 2 months until she couldn't find a job. They had agreed that she was to apply for jobs and have one secured for interview before she moved in. She moved in July 2nd, and she didn't have a job until late January. I, being fresh out of high school with no job experience, was able to get a job before her. This caused my father to have to cover her car payments and insurance, and it set us back financially, but we were okay. Then October came with the discovery of a full year's worth of text messages between her and a friend of hers named Jared, all taking place after my father and her were dating, and while she was still living in her hometown. The text messages were laced with him coming over to give her nighttime love-ins and inappropriate pictures. My father confronted her about it and she denied it, saying we just didn't understand her friendship. My father lets it go, and they haven't messaged each other in weeks. Small arguments pop up, and she starts sneaking money out of my dad's wallet at night to go buy cigarettes. This may only sound like small stuff, but it was a nightly occurrence. This set us back financially as well. The arguments mainly consisted of her lying about something and not admitting to it, or doing something stupid and not apologizing. Things got worse when Christmas came. My father expressed that he didn't love her anymore. He didn't have feelings towards her and that she needed to work to fix the relationship if she wanted it to continue. This meant really trying to get a job and not lying about stupid shit. She agreed that she would. I advised him against giving her that option. I was tired of her shit and wanted her out. She started lying more and more and causing more problems. We believe she started taking some sort of drugs, as she would come back from a drive all shaky and spazzing out, spouting nonsense. She came after myself and a friend of mine during one of their arguments, to which my father responded, "Pack your shit and get the fuck out. How dare you go after my kids, you bitch?" Telling her to get out and leave was a regular occurrence in their fights, but she never took the hint. She was abusive emotionally to everyone in the household, especially my father, reducing my father to tears when he found out that she had been receiving $1,000 a month from her mother, which would have had us staying up to date on her rent payments. We have no idea what she did with the money. No matter the situation, she would always try to twist it so that she would be the victim. Nothing is ever her fault, and it's always a misunderstanding. Then she started smoking in the garage. The door from the garage into the house is right across from my bedroom door, which is always open because our cats like sleeping on my bed with me. I have asthma. I woke up coughing and smelling cigarettes multiple times in one night because of her. She drove recklessly with my little sister and I in the car before, and I told my dad what happened. When he confronted her, she said I was over-exaggerating, that driving in the dark freaks her out, that my sister and I were stressing her out. A minor thing, but she endangered my sister and my cats. We have 2 strictly indoor cats, and her 2 were outdoor cats until they moved here. Her cats taught my cats how to sneak out of the house when the front door is unlatched. She leaves the front door open constantly when she comes back from smoking and lets the cats out. We live right across the street from a huge lot of desert, and we have coyotes here every night. After she finally got a job, she didn't want to contribute to her fair share of the bills. My father asked her for half her paychecks every 2 weeks. She claimed it should only be 25% because there were 4 people in the house. My sister and I were only there on the weekends, as we go to school outside of town, about an hour away, and stay with other family during that time. She apparently wasn't paying her car payments after she got this job, as she got a repossession notice, which she hid from my father. Finally, after financially wrecking us, abusing my father emotionally and financially, endangering myself and my sister, doing drugs, taking money, stealing things from my room, endangering my cats, and many other things, my dad finally gave her 2 weeks to move out. She moved out yesterday, and all I have to say to her is, let's not meet again, because I will not be nice to you like I had to be before. Lots of hate, the daughter of the man you broke. I would like to make something abundantly clear in the beginning of this. I was very naive in my youth, very naive. While my ex was emotionally, sexually, and mentally abusive, he was smart enough to never lay a hand on me physically. He used gaslighting, manipulation, and carefully hidden sadism to control me for 8 years. I forgave him for every slight against me, every instance of cruelty, every mental assault, and every sexual attack. I forgave him because I thought he loved me, and that I was his property because we had been together for so long, and I wore his promise ring. In my mind, I was dealing with actions that would eventually go away with age. I was 17 when I finally got the courage to leave him, and since then he has left messages on Facebook, my phone, my email, called me from texting apps. It was always the same message he leaves. I'm still here. Every month like clockwork. Same time, same day, same message. He has done this for 6 years, and I could do nothing about it. He wasn't breaking any laws, so I couldn't really report him, and nobody cared about it anyway. I blocked each account and continued on with my life, but 2 months ago, the messages stopped completely, and I know why. I got engaged to another man on the same day he messaged me for the last time, and posted about it on Facebook, and magically the messages stopped. He stopped because I was going to marry someone else, and in his mind, I am no longer his property. This is the only thing that makes sense to me, that he believes I belong with a new man and not him, but I have a feeling I have not seen the last of him. So to my ex-boyfriend of 8 years, let's not meet again. Reading through some of the stories here reminded me of a fun one I heard with one of my ex-girlfriends. I don't really remember exactly how it came up, but I think it had something to do with her grabbing some stuff from under the bed one night. Basically, she wouldn't do it and was terrified of it. I never understood why until she told me. Her cousin, who she adored, came home one night to find the house unlocked. They were really confused and frightened about why, so they checked the house, but couldn't find anything missing. They just assumed they had left the place unlocked. The next night, my ex's cousin was laying on her bed, doing whatever young girls do, when her cat would just not shut up. It was laying on the floor of her room, hissing. Despite her appeals, the cat kept going, being very aggressive towards the underside of the bed she was lying on. She decided to see what the fuss was about. She got down on her hands and knees and looked. There was a guy laying there, on his side, staring right into her eyes, holding up a mean-looking knife. The girl obviously screamed like crazy and bolted out of her room, taking her cat with her. Her parents came running. She hysterically told them that there was a man under her fucking bed with a knife. Her dad grabbed her door and threw it shut, locking the guy in there while the police were called. As much as he tried to hold this guy inside the room, the guy ended up overpowering him and getting the door open and running as fast as he could out of the house. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the guy was never found. Thankfully, my bed is very low and couldn't fit anyone under it.